So college football is in a bad place when I'm about to say the following. And this really goes for college sports, not just college football. But ESPN could step in to save it all. ESPN is the entity that you are waiting on to come in and save the day. Yes, the same four-letter network that pulled Texas and Oklahoma away from the Big 12 to the SEC seemed to give exactly zero you-know-whats about the remnants of the Big 12 at that time, whether or not they would just explode into the ether, go into a college football black hole, and never be seen from again. This is the same ESPN that was behind the Longhorn Network, which drove a wedge to the Big 12 anyway. It's the same ESPN that had his former head, John Skipper, give a near admission on the Dan Le Batard show a couple of years ago that they were the ones really pulling all the strings and controlling stuff behind the scenes. Yeah, that entity that has clearly already done a lot of irreversible damage to college football is the entity that might have to step in and save the sport. So, we're in great hands. We're in great hands here. This is from John Wilner, who, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Wilner Hotline has covered the Pac-12 forever. It used to be the Pac-12 Hotline, San Jose Mercury News. Here's the nuts and bolts of what he said. He is basically more or less just corroborating reporting that we've already seen about how ESPN feels about where playoff expansion is going, and namely what the SEC and Big Ten are trying to do with the 4 automatic bids. So it says, multiple industry sources have told the hotline in recent days that ESPN is not necessarily eager for changes and might be staunchly opposed, which could create a most interesting dynamic. ESPN has no relationship with the Big Ten beyond the playoff, but it serves as the SEC's exclusive media partner. It owns Tier 1 rights. It owns the SEC network. It provides the platform for the SEC's broad media machinery. Ross Dellinger, I'm trying to remember what the specific wording was in his article, but he said more or less the same thing. Like ESPN seems like they may be giving some real pushback here on 4 auto bids for the Big Ten and the SEC, because they look around and realize, hey, that's probably not the best move for long-term business here. ESPN finally starting to think long-term, saying, if we do that, and it seems like an invitational, and we're kind of cutting out a part of the country that's going to grow really disenchanted by us pulling a stunt like this, that's not good for the long-term viability of this business. We don't want you guys to do that. Here's how Wilner describes it all. Wilner says the automatic bids would enable the SEC and Big Ten to create play-in games on championship weekend, with number 3 playing number 6, 4 facing 5, for example, for the final spots in the playoff. But those changes could undercut the competitive bar that ESPN covets and risk alienating sections of the country with major media markets. So they are worried about, look, they've already in a lot of ways lost a bunch of the West Coast by blowing up the Pac-12 and what happened there. How much of the country do you wind up cutting out, and how many TV households are you disenfranchising about the sport, and maybe they would turn it off eventually. We're talking down the road, but eventually maybe so. Wilner says, imagine 4-loss SEC teams strolling into the playoff while 2-loss Big 12 teams are left at home. That's the point that he is trying to make there, that you could run into situations like that and people looking around going, well, that's crazy. Like that, it should not be that way. Apparently, ESPN also does not like logistical challenges. Under the 12-team format, 2 of the 4 opening round games face direct competition from the NFL. So if you went to 14, he's saying you would face more direct competition from the NFL, because at that time of year, the NFL, they're just trying to commandeer your entire life. Speaking of, being money hungry, pleasing shareholders, the only thing that seems to matter in this world of ours anymore. The 14-team model would create 2 additional opening round games. Where would they be placed? The NFL plays Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday of the targeted weekend. So what do you do? Where are you going to play that? That would be tricky. And then if you're a TV network like ESPN, you're saying, well, if we got to add 2 more games that are going up against the NFL, how much are we really gaining here in terms of viewership? Like, that's going to be a hell of a fight for us. And then we looked at this first year. Lane Kiffin told us to keep tuning into the playoff, and all these games were not very close. So if we're putting like blowout first round games on up against the NFL, well, we're going to be screwed. I mean, we're not going to make very much. That's not going to net a whole lot for us. So here is how Wilner sums up the situation now that arises from this. Would Greg Sankey, SEC commissioner, would Sankey dare ram through playoff changes that ESPN opposes? Is there a middle ground? Or could the most radical aspects of the proposed format, which would be the 4 auto bids, get left on the negotiating room floor? I guess it really comes down to how much of an appetite do Sankey and Petitti really have toward being bossy czars of college football. I mean, they're already pretty much there, but it's one thing to pick on the ACC and the Big 12 and the Group of 5. It's quite another to pick on ESPN, especially when you are as deeply embedded as they are with the 4-letter network right now. So, yeah, like we know they don't care about any of the other conferences. I mean, that's not going to stop them from doing something, but could their television overlords and such massive business partners for them be the ones to do that? We'll see. We'll see. Here's a possible solution that Wilner throws out there. He says, could ESPN increase the rights fee for the 14-team playoff in exchange for no alterations to the regular season schedules, which would eliminate the need for the automatic bids and the unattractive play-in games on championship weekend? So what he is saying there is that as of right now, if the playoff expands, right, you're getting all this money, $1 billion+ contract for the college football playoff, getting all this money, but in the contract, it does not say, hey, if we expand to 14 teams, ESPN is obligated to pay more. That's not in there, but they could do that voluntarily in exchange for saying, hey, whatever you think you're going to make from going to the auto bids, which will allow you to do the play-in games instead of the championship game, however much money you think all that's going to put in your pocket, let us just give that to you for expanding the field, and then just don't do that. And we'll preserve, for both of us, we'll step in and preserve the betterment of this long-term business for everybody involved. You know, I mean, it's a very surprisingly anti-Super League sort of stance from ESPN as far as that goes. Like them realizing that you gotta leave enough of the sport still intact and standing and theoretically having a chance to compete at the very, very highest level. And if that were to happen, by the way, I think all of us would celebrate. It would be a win. I do genuinely think a win for the better, long-term health of the sport. But if we are talking more short-term Big 12, I actually do think that could have short-term negative implications for the league. And the same would go for the ACC, because you wouldn't have 2 auto bids. And we saw what happened with the Big 12 this year. Like, if it were a 14-team playoff this year, do we think BYU was getting in? If it were a 16-team playoff this year, do we know for sure that BYU would have gotten in? I don't know, man, based on the way they were being talked about or not talked about. So that is the point with that one. Could be a little bit of an exchange that you would have to make there if you are the Big 12, if that were to happen, or if you are the ACC and that were to happen. But I think probably better for the long term of the sport. And the best thing overall out of all of that, it's not just that this could be a good thing for the long-term health of the sport. It's that it seems that ESPN, we now know that ESPN is capable of thinking about something other than short-term cash grab and what's better for them in the immediacy in the short term. Like, this is not being done out of some altruistic, value that ESPN has for the sport. It is about their dollars and cents long-term, but at least if you've got them thinking about the long-term viability of the money here, that's going to lead to some better decision-making for all involved. And so that's pretty good. That's pretty good.